Hello, everyone. We're so happy you're here. My name is Jeannie Walters. I am the founder and CEO of Experience Investigators and the proud author of a new book coming out next week called Experience is Everything. And I'm thrilled to be joined here today for an incredible discussion around the State of CX report from Medallia. Now, this is not just going to walk through the report. What we're going to talk about are all of the many ways that we're kind of living in a state of paradox in customer experience. Investment is increasing, AI is accelerating change, expectations are rising. And so, as we go into this discussion, what can we learn from the data in this report? And what does that mean for you as a customer experience leader? Because I'm sure if you're joining us today, you have a role that is about being that change agent in an organization. So, we're going to unpack that tension today with two incredible experts and leaders. So, first of all, we have Sid Banerjee, the Chief Strategy Officer of Medallia. Sid brings nearly 30 years of experience building companies and solutions at the intersection of customer experience, data, and AI. Today, he focuses on helping organizations operationalize experience to drive real business impact, which is so important. So, hello, Sid. How are you?
Good morning, Jeannie. How are you? Doing well, or afternoon or evening, depending on where everybody is in the world here. But yes, great to be
That's
here.
great. Great. Well, we're happy you're here. And then we also have Carrie Parker, Chief Marketing Officer at Medallia. Carrie is a seasoned marketing leader with 25 years of experience driving growth for technology and software as a service companies. She focuses on building strong go to market strategies, scaling demand, and connecting brand to measurable business outcomes. And so there's a little bit of a theme here. So, how are you, Carrie? Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks, Jeannie. Happy to be here. And hello, everyone.
First of all, if you have questions out there, we encourage you to engage. So please drop questions. We have the Q&A open. We have the chat open. We'll cover as many of those as we can live. You can also download the full report within this webinar, and we will also be sharing the recording and the report with you following today's discussion. So let's go ahead and jump in. The When we talk about customer experience today, we are really talking about not only how do we understand our customers, but how do we continue to deliver for them in an age where expectations are rising all the time. So, we're going to dive into a few of these topics today, including that confidence gap. We're going to talk about where that progress breaks down. And then the best part, we're going to share a few secrets about how leading teams are pulling ahead. And then, of course, I think it's required that we talk about AI in every webinar, right? It's 2026, we have to. So we're going to talk about AI and CX, expectations, trust, and risk, and then we'll dive into Q&A. So I look forward to spending about 30 minutes with you on this topic, on these topics, and then we'll dive into as many of those questions as we can get to. So let's talk about where we're starting here. Many organizations believe that they are improving experiences, but frankly, customers are not feeling that same progress. In fact, this is something that we are seeing in so many different ways across our industry. And really, we have to remember that customers don't grade on a curve, right? They are comparing us to all the great experiences that they have everywhere. And so this perception gap might not always be what we perceive it to be. The data shows a huge perception gap in how companies think they're performing and how customers actually feel. So let's dive into this a little bit. So when you look at this gap, Carrie, what stands out and what do you think those underlying causes are?
Yeah, let's jump right in. Yeah, when we first looked at this data, I have to say some of these numbers really stopped us in our tracks.
Mhm.
And you said it just now that, a majority of CX professionals we believe that the experiences that we're creating are getting better. You see that here with 83% that think that we're delivering above average experiences, and two-thirds believe that if experiences are improving overall. But I think what you can clearly see is only 17% of consumers agreed with the same thing. So that is a massive gap. And that tells us that there's something wrong with how we are keeping our finger on the pulse of what the consumers need. And maybe we're using internal metrics that just don't reflect what the actual customer reality is. Because that's a pretty massive gap. And it's a big problem when the focus on retaining customers and reducing attrition is so paramount these days. We also heard from consumers that it- this is not that their experiences are really a challenge for them. And 30% said that the last interaction that they had with the business was a negative one. So they're not just having experiences that are challenging, it's a regular occurrence. And so these friction points, they're getting missed. And as you can imagine, that's impacting their decisions and it's impacting who they choose to do business with. What you can see here is underscores that 64% say that they're choosing consumer companies more often based on who they trust. And they're looking for those to give them better experiences. So the bottom line is there's real opportunity on the table for those who are looking at the whole journey and finding those signals that are perhaps getting missed.
Yeah, I think that's really important because really, when we're talking about a customer journey, it really is an act of trust to move to the next step with the customer. So we need to make sure that we are building trust in everything we do. And I think this highlights that there's just this lack of trust right now. So, Sid, I'm curious about your perspective here. What should people take away from this?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that I think the feedback we got from this study reinforces to me a few things. I think the gap between companies thinking they do a good job and customers seeing that there's more to be done often is attributed to the fact that when companies do CX, they often will set up programs and say, "I've set up my program, I'm collecting feedback, I'm doing a good job." But what the
Mhm.
customer cares about is the feedback being used to drive improvement? Is it used to actually understand what's working, what's not working, whether it's a suggestion or a criticism? And it takes more than just collecting feedback. It's really about using that feedback to understand and go deep, right? Why are people unhappy? What are the things that are not working? What are the suggestions for improvement? That requires a lot of asking why. And you can do that, in the manual way, which is just try to go deep with customers and research. But you can also do it by using analytics and tapping into, honestly, signals and markers that are often qualitative, not just the quantitative measures. The last thing I think that's important is that it's important to understand the feedback you get and how it ties to outcomes. An outcome could be a customer gets an issue resolved, or a customer is able to purchase what they want, or a customer has, a set of questions about something and they get answers. And if you can't track the feedback to outcomes, you don't necessarily know what you're doing right and wrong. And at its core, I think it's about collecting more than just a single signal. It's understanding how interactions and experiences and frankly journeys affect outcomes and then using that to drive continuous listening and continuous improvement, which I know we're going to touch on in a few minutes, but it does require basically translating insights into operational realities and improvements and ultimately being able to understand qualitatively and qualitatively and quantitatively across the full journey.
And I think we're at a really interesting moment in time with this because, any of us who kind of grew up in this industry, we remember when all we could rely on were what customers told us. And now we have all these amazing ways to look at how are they behaving? What are their actions telling us? What do our operational metrics tell us? When we combine all of that, we get this rich kind of view of not only what the customer thinks they want, but actually how they're behaving and what they're actually interacting with. So those signals are so important to look at for those points of friction in that holistic way within the journey. And I think the bottom line here is we're not lacking data, we're not lacking uh, insights. It's a matter of how we use them. And so I think that's a great opportunity to look at the next thing we're going to dig into here today, because a lot of leaders that I talk to, they know they're kind of stalled. They feel
Mhm.
stuck in this. And most organizations, they're almost overwhelmed with some of those data points and insights. And they're really struggling with how do we turn those insights into operational change? And how do we make sure that we are investing in the right places to get the results both for our customers and our organizations? And in fact, I would argue that most customer experienced teams are really good at identifying problems. The challenge is getting the organization to act on them. So let's talk about where progress actually breaks down. Like, why are we getting stuck here? Carrie, what did the report have to say about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably not a surprise given everything you just shared, but from the consumer's perspective, there is some serious survey fatigue out there.
Mhm.
And I think to your point, 60% are wondering if it's even worth their while to give that feedback. I think that there's a couple things playing out here. Like one, to your point on all the signals, customers already they expect us to already know if they're happy in a moment or what their issues are without having to give that feedback after the fact. I mean, they simply expect it given the data that we have at our fingertips. And second, I think when they share feedback, they absolutely expect it to be actioned and they're feeling that that's not actually happening. And that was a real aha moment for us in the report. And what you see here is when we asked CX practitioners, roughly a third said that they don't do anything with the feedback that they're already receiving. And that's outside of all of those other signals that we should be using and capturing. So it's really hard to make an impact with customers when you're not following through. And Sid, I think you've used the term score watching many times. So I'm sure you'd want to elaborate on what that means here.
Yeah, I think I mean happy to do it now. One of the things that that we've certainly seen over the last 5 or 10 years, but it's still something that a lot of organizations are still kind of trying to catch up to is you you often know the answers to a lot of the questions you ask when you're trying to collect scores if you can collect interactions at scale, right? An interaction could be a digital journey, it could be a call into a contact center. Increasingly, it can be chats or even chatbot or voice bot interactions. When you collect the actual interaction at scale, you learn why someone is interacting with you. You would learn their questions, you learn their struggle topics, you learn how the company, whether again it's an agent or a chatbot or a voice bot, is interacting back with the customer, and you learn the outcome of the interaction, right? Because you can actually identify whether that outcome was a good or bad outcome based on how things resolve. That's really a kind of analysis that most companies need to learn how to kind of dive into. The technology has become remarkably good at being able to make sense of it. When you do that, then you're not just looking at scores, you're getting deep insights. And the insights that come from the things that don't work well can be then pushed back out through processes in the organization to drive awareness, then problem solving, and then continuous improvement. And it really comes down to thinking about driving a governance process where the insights from the signals are collected, connected, distilled into insights, and then pushed back out into the organization in a way that drives both understanding and then change and then improved outcomes for customers. That's ultimately how I think you get the real value.
And I like how you said score watching because sometimes I catch customer experience leaders who are what I call number narrators, right? They share numbers a lot and they share feedback a lot, but they don't really translate it into actionable outcomes that the
Right.
organization can operationalize. And I think that's something we continue to see in the industry right now.
Yeah, if I know my NPS has gone up or down, but I don't know why, and I
Yeah,
haven't taken
exactly.
an action when it's gone down, or I haven't, you know, rewarded people
Mhm.
when it's gone up, I'm not really driving change in my business. And I think that's
Right.
part of the culture change that we want to see our, a lot of customer experience professionals leaning into.
And I think, Carrie, you bring up a really important point when we talked about the data around people are kind of screaming like, "You're not doing anything with this, so why am I sharing my insights with you?" And I think we've all felt that as customers too. So as unsexy as the word governance is, it's so important because that's what leads to actually responding to these customers and making sure we're moving forward with them in the way that they want and all that alignment around the organization. But really, I think all of this summarized by saying like insight alone doesn't actually drive change. And sometimes that's an aha moment for customer experience teams because they've been
Yeah.
told for so long to do that.
One thing I might almost add too, I think is it's
Mhm.
important to measure accountability not just on the score changing, right, but also on a financial or business impact measure that's important to the company changing as well. And that
Mhm.
could be decreasing costs for experiences that are inefficient, right? Or it could be reducing the risk of interactions that try to create, negative financial or even business outcomes to an organization. And one great example I'll just touch on if we have a minute is, we work with a company called Santander Bank, and they actually are looking at CX tied to outcomes such as, am I seeing deposit growth? Am I seeing customer retention? Am I seeing cost to serve going down? Cost to serve is not just a good thing for a company. Most of us don't like taking 2 or 3 hours to do something that we can get done in 5 or 10 minutes, right? So there's a virtuous benefit to measuring those outcomes. They're as important to how to drive good experiences as just tracking the scores.
Yep, I totally agree. And we use something called the CX Success Blueprint, where we start with what are the organizational goals here? Like, if you want more deposits, what are those levers in customer experience that we need to both look for those signals, understand those insights, and take action as well? Because we nothing is in a vacuum here, and everything is connected within that holistic journey. So let's talk now about how do we address this? What are some of the leading teams doing to pull ahead here and to do things differently? And really, the report suggests that organizations are making progress doing three kind of key things. One is expanding those signals, just like we just talked about, of understanding beyond some of the traditional ways that we've listened to customers, operationalizing those insights and enabling action, and then tying experience to measurable business outcomes. So, really, we're talking about moving way beyond listening into operating systems, into almost an ethos for the organization. So, Carrie, can you dive into that a bit? How are these leading teams really leading?
Absolutely. And that is the triumvirate. I mean, you just hit the nail on the head. And, what we see here is it's fascinating that the winners in this space are really those that have moved from just listening programs to actual operating systems, as you mentioned. And there is a correlation between the number of data sources that you use and your ability to prove ROI. What we saw is that teams using 10 sources or more, I think conversational data, digital behavior, traditional feedback methods, they're 92% more likely to prove their value. So
Mhm.
the companies that are doing this, they're thriving. And what's more, we also saw, if you move on one, that fast growing companies were actually twice as likely to prioritize all of those signals and getting that data in compared to those that were flat or declining. So the leaders in the space are those who are moving beyond the what to the why and really connecting sentiment to those actions that impact financial outcomes.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think just like we talked about, there is more accountability in today's world. Your leaders, your boards, they want to see that connection between if we're investing in customer experience, how does that show up? So understanding those business outcomes from the beginning is really important and making sure we can reflect that. And I think that there's a lot to unpack here, but Sid, what are some of your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, well, it's been interesting to watch CX, the technology landscape for CX evolve, particularly over the last 2 or 3 years, because a lot of connecting signals and making sense of the kind of the operational and the experience uh, content that comes into a CX program has been enhanced by AI, right? And in particular, AI is very good at detecting patterns. It's good at connecting patterns to outcomes, and it's actually quite good at distilling the patterns and outcomes into things like recommendations, projections, suggestions that can be used by CX teams to make better decisions and to take change. A good example of an organization we've been working with again here is another bank, CIBC. They were kind of an early adopter in bringing in chats and bringing in call transcripts and bringing in digital signals and really trying to understand how all of that feedback that comes in can ultimately drive the outcomes that matter in terms of, is this a customer that's driving more revenue over a multi-year period? And they found that promoters, and again, knowing what makes you a promoter, and then working on enhancing the experiences for those promoters can drive up to 15% more revenue over a 2-year period. Also, lower attrition and deeper engagement, and that also tends to bring in more family members and more other kind of expanded network of customers into the space. But they did more than just looking at the signal of the promoter score. They looked at all the other data and they did deep analysis to try to understand these things. And that helped to justify the expansion of their program over time and the deployment of these insights across the organization. the digital organizations, the contact center organizations, and the various product lines of business. When you have a program that kind of shows real value and real insight, it gets deployed across an entire organization.
Mhm. Yeah, it feels like it's really a combination of understanding both what those signals mean and understanding that, and then also having priorities around the action. So, if we know that we are, promoters will do more business with us, then we're going to focus on what does make those promoters and how can we actually engage within the organization to deliver more that they want. But if we're just kind of following those scores like we talked about, we will miss those opportunities to really just make change that will not only drive customers to be promoters, but also to spend more, to tell their friends, to bring in their family, all the things that we know great customer experience can do. So, you mentioned AI, and I think I was just talking to a leader this week, and we had a funny conversation about how when she was in this role a few decades ago, she was spending so much time trying to find sentiment and everything, and now it's like you can do that with not even a push of a button, right? Like AI knows. Um, and so we all know the power of AI, and I think we've all seen what it's capable of. And on the other side, I'm sure we've all had those interactions as customers where we're like, this is not working. Like, what is happening here? So it's rapidly becoming part of the way we do business in every organization and every business function, and customer experience is no different about that. But when we think about how do we approach AI, I think there's still this tension right now about customer trust and tolerance and understanding. People are complex. We are emotional beings, and so we want to make sure that if AI is dealing with our data and different things like that, that we're still going to have that experience that we expect. So, Carrie, what did the data say about how organizations are approaching AI in customer experience?
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic between humans and AI. So I think the not surprising data, to your point on AIs on all of our lips these days in our minds, is that the vast majority of organizations have some form of AI goal. So that's probably not surprising. I think what was really interesting as we dug into this a bit more was that consumers are far less forgiving of AI mistakes than they are of human ones, which
Mm.
you see the 42% here who said that a human error is easier to swallow than a bot getting it wrong. So that illuminates, I think, some opportunities, right? Of how can you use AI in really intelligent ways to enable frontline workers and give it to humans in ways that make them more efficient and provide more powerful tools for them to take those actions in real time that we've been talking about.
For sure. And I think the way that I'm seeing it used the most right now is that frontline human support. And the other great thing about that is, when we get right down to it, AI is still somewhat new to a lot of these organizations. And those frontline humans can help us say, hey, this isn't going the way I thought, or find some of those friction points as well, which can be really, really helpful. So, Sid, what do you think is most important about using AI? What do you see for the future of this?
Yeah, again, I think this study, at least to me, does validate a kind of a philosophy that we've taken on, certainly here at Medallia, about how we think about AI. I think in the first first order of kind of value, AI helps to, as I mentioned earlier, tease out patterns and signals into sort of insights. And a big part of how we think about AI is use it to quickly identify what is going on in experiences and what we need to do to fix things. The second piece of it is really to push those insights as recommendations and automations to help frontline teams, humans that are in the business of interacting with customers, be more responsive, be able to find and respond to a customer more quickly, and give them the tools to be able to do things in kind of a hybrid environment where the human still owns the conversation or the touch point, but the AI makes them more efficient at their jobs.
Mhm.
And a big part of that is things like automating closed loop or automating identifying issues that need to be fixed in a particular digital or operational or even retail channel by seeing what the impact is of a change and then making the change. And I think where it's going to ultimately go, it will start certainly to replace human interactions, I think, over the next few years. But at the end of the day, AI is not a replacement for humans. It's really a force multiplier, both in the human-man interactions, and then over time, you're going to see some automations where there's confidence and where frankly there's qualitative improvements, which we have to measure because as the study showed, humans are much less forgiving of machines that make mistakes than humans. And so those machines
Mhm.
need to be very good before we take out the humans. And I'm not suggesting we ever will. We will just use those technologies as a way to kind of augment and ultimately expand the capabilities that we have when we do customer experiences. And again, just to give one more example, we work with a company called United Rentals. They're using AI in the analytical domain to kind of quickly identify and get to the root cause, what's causing a good or bad experience, using a technique called root cause assist. They're using a technique called smart response so that when customers have feedback that requires a response back, a closed loop, if you will, we can use the AI to kind of predefine what that response should be. The human can review it and then ultimately close the loop with the customer. Those capabilities allow humans to be more responsive at finding and fixing and at interacting with customers when there's customer experience challenges that require some side of engagement to close the loop. That's going to be a big part of how I think you're going to see AI really pushed out. If you're not using it today, you will be over the next year or two.
Mhm.
If
Mhm.
I could add one thing to your first point, Sid, we had a customer join us on stage at our experience event just a month or two ago, and he used a phrase that I love so much. Their organization is using AIs to give employees superpowers. That
Right.
because they have AI at their fingertips on the front lines, they're able to give more personalized advice, which actually makes it a more human connection, which I found utterly fascinating and a great use of the tools available.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's I mentioned trust and how important it is to build trust with customers. I think when we get to that point, and I love what you said about Sid about, we still have a human who's reviewing things before sending that personal um, AI supported response. And I think once we start getting into a rhythm with that, customers will see this is actually really helpful and relevant and personalized, and that actually builds trust. So it's really a question of making sure we are amplifying the right things with AI and leaning into it both in that scalable way and also in that way that is um, very human in many ways. So it's an
That's great.
exciting time. And I feel like we're at the beginning of the marathon here, right? We're all going to learn so much. And when we have this conversation a year from now, we'll have all sorts of other interesting case studies. But well, at this point, I would love to bring in a few questions because we're getting some great ones right now. So let's see. I'm going to start with one from. I'm going to just say Chuck. So customers get inundated with communications already. How have you seen an effective approach at communicating back to customers that actions are being taken based on their feedback? And this goes to closing that loop. So
Sure.
any thoughts on this?
I can take it if you want. You want to go, Carrie? All right, that's fine. So it's a great question. I think typically customers want closed loop when when you can sort of infer that there's actually value in communicating back to a customer. I think a big part of our experience is when you do close the loop. Typically, you can raise a score like an NPS, and you can generally create a resolution event that actually makes that customer more satisfied with an interaction than if not. But I think it's important to not overwhelm customers every time they give you feedback. So we would typically look for what I would describe as alert-worthy conditions. It could be something as explicit as "I need you to call me back," right? Or it could be a very negative score or very negative qualitative markers. Those get built into essentially alert-based mechanisms, certainly within the Medallia environment, that help us to prioritize customers where a response is likely to be appreciated, if not needed. And we typically will work with our organizations, our customers, to figure out what that protocol could be. But we do have some best practices with the smart response capability that we've introduced over the last year and a half or so. We now have an ability to actually infer those markers in an even more powerful way using AI. But in the past, it was done through more traditional analytics.
And Sid, I really like how you highlight that as an alert kind of environment because what you're doing is you're looking for those very human signals when they're not necessarily saying, this is high priority. They're not using those words, but, inferring by just natural language. And I think that's something AI is really becoming very good at. And so that's a really powerful way to use it. So great example.
Yep.
And okay, let's go to another one. We've got one from Andrea. When insights professionals are usually disconnected from the front line or product teams, what are leading teams doing to operationalize insights and enable action? And I bet a lot of people can relate to this one because we don't always have that deep connection that we want with those frontline teams. So, anyone want to take this one?
I can start it off and then Sid, I'll let you build on it. I think the example that Sid gave shortly ago with CIBC, I think what they did incredibly well was they built bridges across their entire organization to get insights out of the silo and get it into action, right? So I think that there's an opportunity for CX professionals to interact differently with the rest of the business and to think differently about how you are working with the other business partners to get those insights out of the silo and get closer to where the actual actions will be deployed.
Mm,
Yeah,
great.
I think that's there. To me, there's two parts to that answer. Certainly, Carrie's response is absolutely correct. To the extent you can create kind of a cross-functional, we like to think of them as centers of excellence, right? Where the CX professionals who are often corporate find things, but they have a kind of a communication paradigm where they can distribute those insights out to lines of business, to product teams, to digital teams, to the contact center teams, with an expectation that there's a working group that then goes to what can we fix, what's the impact of making a fix or change, and then ultimately tracking continuous improvements to the customer experiences across channels. That can make a big difference because you're now part of a center of excellence. You're not just a corporate function distributing reports or scores. A second way to do this is also to just empower the front lines. And again, a big part of our approach, certainly here at Medallia, is when we deploy a CX solution, it will go out to tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands of users in large organizations. If you look at some of the leading retailers and banks that we work with, a major pharmaceutical retailer deploys out to over 90,000 users across thousands of retail locations. So that information, those alerts, those recommendations, those closed loop capabilities are actually pushed out. There's still a corporate team that looks for the outer loop, the big picture items that need to be fixed, but it's very much a part of the culture that we will push those insights out to the front lines. So you can fix things at the front lines where your customers are interacting with you.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because I think sometimes we don't include their insights, their observations, and having that two-way dialogue can be really, really powerful as well. And we use something called a CX charter, which I totally stole from project management. But the idea is everybody needs to understand what is the customer experience we're trying to deliver, because that will then empower them to use those insights in and feedback and everything in the right ways. So, okay, I think we have time for a couple more here. So, when it comes to AI versus people, how do we decide which parts of the customer journey absolutely must stay human? What's the main rule here?
Sid, I'll
So
let you
that
talk.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, and I'm gonna be very honest and say I'm not sure I know the answer to this one yet because AI is changing so fast.
Mhm.
A general rule of thumb, if I could give advice to someone today, is if the AI is as good at understanding and communicating the insight or the action as the human would be, I think there's going to be a situation where you will have to make a decision. Does it make sense to have the AI drive the interaction or the experience or not? I think in many cases, though, customers are not going to embrace change to experiences. They'll embrace changes to insights. Like if I'm a customer experience person, I'm very comfortable using an AI tool to find out what's going on faster or sooner than if I don't have AI. And in most organizations where we've deployed AI, it's been embraced. Right. The one statistic I'll share with you is we started rolling out AI features to our corporate customers starting about 18 months ago. And we went from the first couple months, there was a lot of questions about, I don't know if I can get this through my legal, or I don't know if that's something I'm willing to do with change. We went from 0 customers to several thousand customers in less than a year. And these are big corporations. So the rate of adoption surprised even, some of the most tech forward people here in my company at Medallia. Having said that, when you get to those interactions between customers of corporations, right? And the corporations, the organizations. There, I think people are being more deliberate. And I think they're right to be, because I think we're going to learn over the next few weeks and months and years. what the tolerance is for replacing humans, if there is even in some cases, with completely automated interactions.
Hmm. Carrie, anything to add there?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head with that one, Sid.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like I said, I think we're in the beginning of the marathon, right? So we're going to continue to learn and adjust and figure out tolerance and all of those things. So, whoever asked that question, we're right there with you.
Yeah.
Juicer.
So, let's see, one more here, I think that we have. Are there are these figures referring to the report here, both for B2B and B2C the same, or can we see any difference in trends? And I think this is a question that a lot of organizations have too. What are the big differences in B2B and B2C, or are there big differences?
That is a great question. I don't believe we called out B2B specifically, but we can take that away as a follow-up and provide some
Hmm.
context and context if we do have that data.
Hmm.
The majority of our focus was on the consumer side, since that is just
Hmm.
so clear that there are so many gaps and needs to address that.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and one thing I would add to that is just that I think we are living in a world where sometimes we assume B2B is not personal and they don't feel as strongly about these expectations, but that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing, people feel very personally about their relationships in B2B, and their expectations in business are also being set by their expectations as a regular customer. So they want to have better relationships with their partners and vendors and everybody else, just like they would as on the B2C side.
100% agree. I mean, these are still humans making decisions, and
Mhm.
it's the human experience. If you want to have a great experience with whoever you are choosing to do business with, whether you're operating as a business person or as an individual consumer, and so it's
Mhm.
paramount to address the overall experience in each realm, even if they look different.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Hey, can I know we have 5 minutes left, give or take. There's
Mhm.
a question on survey fatigue that had 7 likes on it. I'm
Yeah,
happy to take a minute and respond to that.
sure.
This is not something that necessarily came up in the report, but it is something that we are tracking here at Medallia, and worth sharing at least what we've learned just from talking to customers over the last few years. Um, there is survey fatigue in every part of I think the CX programming kind of landscape. I would say, just based on conversations I've had with customers over the last few months, it tends to be most tied to email. And generally, the most fatigue seems to be coming from location based experiences. Think shopping at a store or going to a bank where you're actually in a physical location. And I think part of that is because of the disconnected nature of those interactions and then the solicited feedback. There tends to be less fatigue off of digital and less fatigue off of SMS, just because it's more kind of connected to you and more quickly. Having said that, though, I think the broader theme that the study did capture is that to the extent you can infer um, experience, satisfaction, even promoter detractor information from the interactions themselves, and that's increasingly doable in digital interactions, in phone interactions, and chat interactions, you don't need as many surveys to get that same signal, right? So,
Mhm.
whereas a major retailer here in North America shared with me that when they started working with Medallia back in the 20 teens, they were getting 9-10% response rates from surveys at the store level. That is down around 6% now, so 40%
Mm.
reduction. Their digital volumes are nowhere near as declined, but there's fatigue everywhere. So
Yep.
we very much encourage people, obviously keep running your programs because you want to have that signal. It's a good kind of tracking mechanism, and it's actually a good training mechanism even for AI. But expand the aperture, right? Get the data from other channels. It's increasingly easy to do so because of the fact that you can process calls and chats, and you can use AI to make sense of it all, and you can generate alerts and closed loops without the survey. And a big part of how we're seeing value being created with these new generation CX programs is going beyond the survey, not getting rid of it, but augmenting it with these other signals.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that we need to make sure we're still listening to the people who want to share with us. And we're at the same time looking for those other signals in those operational ways and behavior and all of those things. So it's time to wrap up. It feels like we could keep talking for a long time on all of this, and the report is rich with information and data. So I encourage everybody to download that and look through it on your own. But really, I think to summarize, it's about customer experience is really about so many things. It's about all these decisions that are made across the organization. It's about not just those individual points of the journey, but the holistic journey for the customer. And it's never about that one single interaction. And so we're going to do a quick lightning round here. So if you were leading customer experience in 2026, what would you prioritize first? Carrie, I'm going to start with you.
Your insights absolutely have to drive action across the business. You have to act on what you're hearing.
There you go. I just heard a chorus of amens behind me. So well done. So Sid, what about you? What would you prioritize?
I mean, we spent a lot of this call talking about technology, but I think the most important part of driving change in an organization is a culture of governance and a culture of continuous improvement. So taking those insights and making sure that they're pushed out and owned, not just by those CX teams, but really across the organization.
And I'm going to add one here for me. And I would say just make sure you are defining what customer experience really means at your organization and understand what is the experience you're trying to deliver. That will help make all these other decisions a lot easier. So thank you, Sid. Thank you, Carrie. This was a wonderful discussion. Thank you, Medallia. And if you do want to go deeper, the report is available to download right now. It will also be sent out along with the recording to everyone who registered for this event. I'm Jeannie Walters. I'm so thrilled that you joined us today, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for hosting, Jeannie. Appreciate it.
Thank you.